Hello, welcome to Spotlight Community Service. I am your host, Joseph Patrick Fair. Stand by for MacKenzie Skalski, School Teacher of the Year 2025 STEM Advocate. Welcome to Spotlight Community Service, where we shine a light on the change makers shaping the future of Kalamazoo County and beyond. Today's guest is more than just a teacher. She's a force of nature in the classroom and the community. MacKenzie Skalski is the 2025 Michigan Science Teachers Association Elementary Science Teacher of the Year, a STEM innovator and a compassionate leader redefining what education looks like in the 21st century, from robotics and equity to emotional regulation and real-world impact. She is preparing kids not just for tests, but for life. Join us as we explore how one educator is turning science into service and a classroom into a catalyst for change. I would like to turn the mic over to MacKenzie and let her tell everybody her background and credentials.
Thank you. I appreciate you for having me here today, Joseph. Thank you very much. Yeah. I am a high school graduate, a college graduate, and I've earned my master's degree in STEM education. I'm a local teacher around here, so that's kind of where I'm at and what I've done so far.
Excellent, MacKenzie. Wanted to have you on here to talk to you after a good friend named Dr. Julie Sorensen connected us. Shout out to Julie. Thank you for connecting me to MacKenzie. That was very gracious of you. I'd like to start a question by talking a little bit about purpose and background. Can you take us back to the first spark? When did you know teaching wasn't just a job for you, but a calling?
So the spark came in first grade. My teacher, Mrs. Ramtham, sorry about that. And I actually have an old yearbook, if you can believe that. So she's in there.
This is good. This is good.
It's not from first grade, but
Yes.
it does show her in there as a first grade teacher. She had a theme in her classroom, and it was stars. And I just remembered feeling very welcome, very warm, very inviting. I never was made to feel less than or stupid, even if learning wasn't always easy for me. We met later on in life when I was graduating high school, and she passed on some of her star memorabilia from her classroom as she was retiring and I was starting into the world of teaching. There were many more experiences that kind of kept reiterating the fact that teaching was going to be my calling. I explored veterinary type situations and wasn't my thing. That loss of life got to me way too quickly. So that was really the first spark. So now I have my own theme. Pineapples is kind of my thing. So I have pineapples
Wonderful.
all over my classroom. And that kind of was a quote I got from my friends where it's like, stand tall, be strong, be sweet on the inside and outside. And so it just kind of came into the classroom and blossomed. And now there's pineapples over my room. Not like all over, but it's definitely there. I come from a family of educators. My mom was a special education educator and special ed supervisor. And so that was where they really valued education for them. They actually grew up in the same community that I'm working in. And education was their way out. So they just set that goal of getting a higher education and not necessarily getting out of town, but getting out of poverty was their goal. And that was something they did together. So that's kind of when I knew teaching wasn't just a job, but a calling for me.
Excellent. As early as first grade, you had somebody set a high example. You recognized it. You started looking a little bit at that teacher style. You integrated your own style in and took the lead from that. Then your parents were educators, and they were you were following a pattern in your family of education, which is very honorable. Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit about identity as an educator. You've described your teaching style as constructivist and culturally responsive. What does that look like in a classroom on an ordinary Tuesday?
So it's a two-part question, but they do marry really well together. So as you mentioned, I do mostly STEM in my classrooms. So science with the embellishment of the technology, the engineering, math is kind of just going to be there anyway. And so with that, framework in mind, I knew that I needed something that would hit all of the bells and whistles of standards and assessments, and knowing they really got it, but knowing they got it in a really meaningful way that they could demonstrate. And applying knowledge we know is going to be a better use of their knowledge base than just answering a multiple choice question. So Constructivist really hit the bill. It's really active. It's really hands-on. So for what that looks like is modeling. A lot of the times they're using their hands. So I have, what did I bring? I brought some Play-Doh, some modeling dough, if you know, got to keep that brand off. I have some magnets. Sometimes you can show how, not necessarily behaviors of motion of molecules, but how they behave when you add speed, for example, or temperature. So you can model that with 3 dimensions. And then the other thing I brought was just a colored pencil. A lot of kids like to draw in 2 dimensions. So I have that as well for us today. It's authentic. It demands that they really know the concept more than just regurgitation. So that's the constructivist side. The culturally responsive side forces students to see things from a new lens. So I like to kind of do a lot of questioning with the students, and it's very organic, it's very authentic, it's very real, and every year it's different, even if I teach the same thing, because the kids are different and they bring different funds of knowledge with them into the classroom. So if you've got a kiddo in a family that have traveled to all the continents except for one, that's pretty fantastic. And so you use that, you pull that in, you share their experiences, you give them the floor for a moment, and then you acknowledge it, you name it, you bring that into your conversation, and now you've got a talking point. Then what's really fascinating about that is on that emotional level, 2 kids who probably would have never associated themselves with each other on a social basis, like at all, they find a connection to somebody who they would have already been like, nope, not my person. I'm never going to hang out with them. Don't sit near me in the lunchroom, you know? And they're like, oh, you play that game too, huh? What level are you on? And they find a way to connect. And it's just from questioning and sharing that knowledge. So the way it marries is because you talk about the person, you talk about their experiences, and you force them to reflect and see things from a different lens. And sometimes that lens is different. Sometimes that lens is cloudy. Sometimes that lens is hard to understand, but it's putting it out there anyway, and having it be a part of our classroom. So it's really tricky to do that. So that's why I think it's important to do a lot of training. Don't just jump in with it and think it's easy. It's not. It requires vulnerability. It requires a safe space. And it requires you to have that ability to give students that chance to be vulnerable and for it to not backfire. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, you hit at least 3 or 4 things I could completely relate to. Back when I went to school, occasionally, I think I would be saying in class, and I would zone out. I would maybe be dreaming about playing football or baseball and riding my bike or something. And that constructivist, where you're building enthusiasm and getting them engaged, maybe they feel like they're directing a little bit of the conversation, and they don't feel like they're getting lectured. They feel like more like they're having a conversation with a peer. And then the second part that you brought up that I really never thought about, this cultural thing. Often we're afraid of people, and it's often some ignorance that's in our mind, and then we find some mutual thing. We both like puzzles, or we both like crayons or something, and then all of a sudden that goes away, and you're exactly right. People that wouldn't typically be friends, the wall kind of comes down. They kind of get to know each other. They build trust. That's a beautiful thing that you're doing in your class.
Yeah.
I wish we had that in the 70s. I don't remember much of that in the 70s, to be honest.
Times were
when
different.
I was elementary school, I remember having a teacher like one that you're talking about, Mrs. Geyer, but most of my teachers just stood up there and droned on about history, and you got to memorize, these dates and the Civil War and the rest of it, and it really wasn't fun. It sounds like being in your class might be fun most of the time, which is a huge thing.
It's a lot of work for the kiddos too, though.
Education, yeah. No, good for you.
Yeah. Well, I'm asking them to go beyond manners, beyond being nice. I'm asking them to be genuinely copacetic with one another, and so that's a lot of emotional work.
The integration and getting kids into a conversation, and maybe you spark some creativity and some curiosity in them, And then if you have the proper mind, you could see that and then steer that to the next kid and the next kid. And I can imagine your classroom. Kids are not staring out the window, dreaming about riding their bike, or maybe playing with magnets and laughing a little,
Yeah,
which I don't actually remember laughing.
I think we all need those days where you stare out the
yeah.
window.
Yeah, I did have an inordinate amount of times where I stood out the window and would dream about snow skiing.
Nice.
But yes, the world's changed a lot in 50 years. Let's take a pivot to emotional roots. And you shared that the education that shaped your family's trajectory, was there a moment when you realized that your classroom could do the same for others?
So at first, no, it wasn't the goal to go out and make waves and be different. I didn't see the impact of the way I was teaching necessarily right away, because you're just in the throes of it, and you're doing life and kids and marriage and moving, and it's a lot. So I don't think I necessarily thought about this is where this is going, and what I'm doing is making a difference, I guess. It was just kind of like, you're surviving, you're learning, you're changing how you're doing it. You're taking all the knowledge you've got and you're like, okay, I think this thing is working. Okay, that thing's not working. I'm gonna tweak that next year, and you're getting input. And where I'm at now, when I think most teachers need like that first 5 years to really figure it out, even maybe the first 3 years, really good mentors make a difference too. And so for me, no, not right away. So I brought, my artifact is this paperweight. This was my mom's when she was a teacher, so this sat on her desk, and so this was passed on to me when she left the classroom and became an administrator. So I have that with me, and it's a special one. The kids are always like, "What is that?" Because we're from an era of we don't need paperweights anymore, right? So that was kind of my memento, that emotional rote. So what I've learned, and you run into it's like inevitable now. When you've taught for over a decade, you can't necessarily escape your teacher identity. It's part of you wherever you go. You know, your 9 to 5 doesn't end. You're going to be out in the community, and you're at sporting events, or you're at Western game or whatever, and grocery store, Qdoba. Even I ran into a former student at Qdoba. Miss Skalski, do you remember me? And I said, yes, I do. Named his first name, his last name, and his sister. Yeah. And so wow. It's just, it's not like I tried to memorize everyone. You just do. And so anyway, you learn later on the impact you have and how it causes these ripples. And sometimes what they remember is how naughty they were. And for me, that's that learning time when you were figuring out how to do it on your own and how to make mistakes on your own. So the second path I have, or artifact I have, is something that says, find joy in the journey. That's so not beautiful. Not every path is easy. Not every experience is there, but I feel very strongly that one of my jobs in that safe space of a classroom is to allow for failure and allow for it to be a safe failure, where there's always going to be a safety net of someone or group, or if no one else, me, that's going to allow you to experience that failure and to know what to do with it, to know how to come back from it, to know how to learn from it, and to find joy in that, and to do that cycle over and over and over again, to just keep growing.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. You bring up something in school that I was terrified of failure, to be honest, and I was terrified of getting bad grades and letting my parents down and all that. And that's very spiritual in the thing that you're letting people know that failure is part of life. And I've discovered as I get older, failure is part of life, and often we learn the best stuff from the times we fail. Then we have to pivot. And then there is a new lesson put in front of us, and we have to have the courage to process the failure and then pick ourselves up and run at the next goal. And sounds like you're teaching your children well on how to adjust to the troubles of life here. Let's talk a little bit about community lenses, and how do you approach teaching in a community like Kalamazoo, where students may face food insecurity, housing instability, and trauma?
Great question. I think you stay educated. You stay knowledgeable about what are your resources in your community. Community is the number one answer. Staying connected, knowing what resources are available, and bringing them to your school. And not feeling like, and maybe this is wrong, but not feeling like it's a dog-eat-dog type of situation where you got to snatch that resource before someone else can get it, but rather, what do we have available, who are the students we're serving, and allocating those resources, creating jobs in our school district where we have people that are paying attention regularly. And there's a question later about how to stay connected and really know your students. And again, some of that emotional work in that brave space, you find out things about students and their families, and oftentimes there are resources available. It takes vulnerability. It takes knowing how to accept help, and it's easier said than done. So I brought a couple of things, but one of them in the summer training, right, comes from the Kalamazoo Youth Development Network. So there's just different prompts and resources available. In every classroom in the school I work at, we also have a multiple-sided document of all of the different resources available. I don't know. There's a lot of, this is a really heavily packed conversation, but there's backpack programs. We have free breakfast, free lunch. So I think when you think about politically speaking, making sure that we have those funds available for students. And on the hierarchical level, we know that we cannot teach students who are not ready to come to school to learn, and they are coming to school not ready to learn if they are not having their basic needs met. So we are making sure students have at least their basic needs met while they're at school in this safe space, so that during the time that we have them, we're doing the best we can with them, if that makes sense.
No, that's a beautiful holistic picture that you're painting, if I have this right. The student coming to school is part of what the school and the teacher is responsible for, but making sure that they're in a safe place where they can learn and they're fed and their housing is stable and all the rest of these things is the second part of the education. They can't learn if they're not in the right mind space, and we have to have these safety nets to help the kids. And it's great that you have those resources by, and you try to steer the family to some resource so the kid can show up and be at school and learn and have their mind on learning opposed to worrying or being caught up in some social problem in their family.
And it's not me necessarily personally, but it's maybe me
system.
Informing, a counselor who informs the triage person or trauma person, and then they're able to get the resources available to the families in need. So with humility and humanity, I think those are the two big components of this.
No, that's beautiful service, and that's what the show is about, community service, and should be very proud of that. And the schools should be proud that it has a system to help people when they're in trouble to get educated. The next question is teaching through crisis. You've taught through the pandemic. What were the changes during that time? What did your students teach you about resilience maybe during the COVID?
Yes, they did. So I'm going to start with the artifact, and I'll go into what I learned through that experience. So my placard would be, I think that's the Clifton Gallup Strengths Test Finder thing. And I was a high achiever, as you know, continual learner. I like individualization. I'm an arranger and a restorative person. So I like to see everything and kind of put it in its best fit situation, so everyone has what they need in the best situation. So that's how I'm going to start. And part of why I started with that is because when we were shut down, I just was like, okay, this is what we're doing. I don't have control over this. Okay, I got to figure out my own children on top of my school children and living situation. And there was a lot going on. And I was raised with a lot of grit and perseverance, and you just pull up your bootstraps and you keep going, and there's nothing that can stop you. And I learned during this pandemic that while that's very important, there is no amount of grit or perseverance that's going to allow you to mentally sustain that for an extended period of time. And so what kept filling my bucket, so to speak, was the students. And, our class sizes got reduced, but you kept teaching. And I actually cycled with my students that I had at the end of one year to the next year. So I had the same set of kids. I was teaching a different grade, different content. Science was the same. But I did could you imagine COVID robotics? So thankfully there was VR robotics. So I learned something new and dug deep and figured it out, made a lot of videos on how to do it, learned how to screencastify to the nth degree, used all the free trials, got it all done. But it was the kids. They showed up during office hours. They dug out their Halloween costumes. They found humor. Similar to in the classroom where I was giving you that example of two kiddos who never would have ever found common ground. Now I've got kiddos on this screen who came to office hours to socialize that normally would have never been to. I would have put in the same room or pegged as friends, so to speak. And again, they found common ground over an anime show. It was just really cool. Very, very humbling, very bucket filling. I think it reminded me of the work I'm doing is important, to have that space to let them socialize. We're in this together, and that the need for balance is really important, and the need for me to be real, that being strong doesn't mean that you don't also need space to heal, that you also need space to cry, that you need space to figure it out, and that it's okay to like break that facade down of I'm strong, I'm perfect, let's do this, and this is hard, and let's figure this out. What's working for you? Do you like this office hours? Are these too many videos? Did you like that read aloud? You know, and doing less to achieve more kind of became what I learned, the biggest thing I learned out of that pandemic.
Doing less to achieve more and make an adjustment. And then the key thing that I heard in there is this grit. You had to have some grit, and you had to have the courage to pivot and try different methods, and you kind of had to make adjustments, VR robotics or real world robotics, and sounds like you kind of stepped up the table and taught yourself how to teach under this circumstance, which is a sign that you're very dedicated and you didn't just throw your hands up and quit teaching, which I believe probably some people did because it became too difficult. But yeah, very honorable to figure out what was working and not working, and then make adjustments during COVID so the kids continue to have an education. I would maybe like to move to mental health and regulation. This thing in school, I don't remember ever really much, but I think nowadays there is. You've been introduced breathing sessions, exercise, mindfulness, nature journaling in your classroom. Why do you believe emotional regulation is just as important as science?
Well, it is science, that it's a best practice. So that's why I started doing it. I think it also came out of this pandemic, surviving pandemic, doing less to achieve more. And when you're in a better headspace, not just your basic needs met, but once you get up to like the top 2 tiers of Maslow's hierarchy, which is ideally where we're at with kiddos, that's where you are asking them to do some more self-actualization. And that takes a lot of confidence. That takes a lot of encouragement. And so that mental aptitude is often really hard. I mean, think about all those Olympic athletes. What do they say is the hardest thing, racing or the mental load before they get on the track, right? So it's more mental than it is anything else. When you, maybe not for everybody, but that's what I've heard more. So it also blends itself well with the constructivist theory. It's hard. It's a lot of group work and a lot of emotional regulation, a lot of social interaction. And so having a space to teach them some techniques is only fair to say, here, do this really hard thing without any tools. Good luck. Versus, hey, let's try this really hard thing. I know it's hard, and we're going to do it together. And here are some skills when you start to feel a certain way. And how do you know you're feeling a certain way? And here's a technique. Let's try this new technique. And maybe it's not for everybody, but it's something you got in your back pocket. And when that time is there and they're like, okay, this is not good, my group, they're driving me nuts and da-da-da. And I'm like, okay, well, let's take a minute. And what do you think is going to work for you? Is it going to be this, that? Yeah, let me try that. And so there's tools that are there to grab when you need them, basically. I'm not great at doing all of the things all the time. I don't know if anyone is, but I always have at least 3 go-to ones that are kind of like the top of mine. So 4-7-8's one of them. And the other one is I've learned, again, through the pandemic, so this is just an idea. I have 2 different sets of these mindful activities. They're online and all sorts of ones. Is journaling, the importance of written input, written, what do you call those, self-reflections, and written just times to think and write it out. So we also do some nature journaling. I used to have it really scheduled, like Mindful Mondays, Tricky Tuesdays, Wordy Wednesdays, but I think now I just do it more of an organic, dedicated, scheduled time to go reflect. Sometimes I give a prompt. Sometimes I say it's open write, and they always have a choice. If they need to write about something that they need to write about, they always have that choice to write. And then I model with them. So this is my journal from when I'm writing out there with them, and if I'm not managing kids falling out of trees, just kidding. But it's an assigned thing. Who gets the tree today? And so I think that's kind of it. It's science to do at least something, if not try it out.
For people out there, I'm a proponent of mindfulness
Mm-hmm.
and journaling and the breathing exercise. For somebody out there that doesn't understand this thing, which there are people, in the core idea, and if I'm incorrect, I'd like you to correct me on this. We can occasionally get our emotions stirred up too high, and that can cloud our thoughts. And then there are mindful exercises and strategies like you teach the kids where they bring down their heart rate and their breathing, which often raises, it sounds contradictory, it raises the oxygen in the blood going up the brain, gets more fuel, they feel more relaxed and focused. Yes, that is something that I wish they taught us in school. Right ahead.
Well, I think it's also important to know, I mean, we were talking about like a cursive earlier, and, you know, as old folks, if it ain't broke, don't fix it type mentality. And it helps with understanding on the human level as well when you add in the idea that this is neuroscience. We're still learning about the brain, and I have a hard time pronouncing this part of the brain, but I think it's the amygdala. I don't know, but it gets hijacked. Amygdala. Thank you. I always have a hard time with that. I have these words. That's one of the words. And the amygdala gets hijacked, right? And so you go into reptilian brain, your fight or flight brain, and your emotional regulation is gone. You're making rash decisions out of survival, basically classroom survival. And that's where these help you regulate and get you to a place where it's now making those better decisions, safer decisions for yourself, for everyone around you, emotionally, physically, mentally, so we can get to the academic portion.
Yeah. The amygdala is quite important with the frontal cortex to have high executive function, and people feel like they're empowered and that they're in control of the moment or their life when that's working. And you're right, when it's hijacked, they feel a little bit like they're riding in a bus that is on a train track and doing whatever it wants to do. And yes, it's very distressing for a kid. For a kid to be able to pull themselves out of that and get recentered and focused in a classroom is a very valuable thing to the whole society and the school. We talked a little bit earlier about equity and representation. You're a fierce advocate of STEM access, especially for young girls and underserved kids. Why is early access to STEM a game changer?
So there's a long game, and then there's a short game. The short game is to increase creativity. So here's my STEM rock right there. I was fortunate enough to be mentored by two different women at STEM. My building is called STEM, and they also were science teachers. As I mentioned, my mom was also a pretty good, strong advocate of my education growing up as well. And so she made sure that I had female science teachers, which were rare when I was going to school. So it makes an impact because when you see yourself in that field, you're more likely to then do that thing in that field. And there's, I'm sure, way more research than that simple answer. The short game for me with the scholars I have, 4th and 5th graders mostly, is to enhance their creativity, to put it all out there, to make them look up and say, what ceiling? There is no ceiling. Glass ceilings don't exist. We're in this classroom. And that requires you to have that safe space, but it requires you to have that experience and, I don't know, the chutzpah to just go for it and not care what everyone else thinks or say, oh, well, that person can't do it or they're not doing it, so I'm just going to sit here instead of do that. And the creativity part is really, really, really critical in the STEM field. So you can AI all you want, but when you have artists literally making the world around you, there's nothing that AI can foresee. It's going to be people that make that world around you.
Hello, this is Joseph Patrick Fair for Spotlight Community Service. This wraps up our spotlight on Michigan Teacher of the Year, MacKenzie Skalski, a fearless force in the classroom, guiding young minds with science, mindfulness, and a heart. But her impact does not end with the final bell. In episode 2, we follow MacKenzie beyond the lab coat as she rolls up her sleeves for real-world change as a community volunteer. If you thought her classroom was inspiring, just wait. Stay tuned, for the story is just getting started.